Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. Thanks for joining us. My name is Stelio Dallo and I'm part of the AWS marketing team here in Seattle, and I'm very pleased to be able to host this webinar today where you'll get to hear from some of our customers who will be able to share with you their experiences around their disaster recovery implementations. Let's begin just with a little bit of housekeeping, and if you're watching this on replay, you may want to jump to the next slide. So just want to let everyone know all lines are on mute. The duration of the webinar is going to be about 1 hour maximum, and we'll have time for Q&A at the end of the webinar. So if you have questions that come up during the webinar, feel free to enter them, please, in the question dialog box in your browser, and we'll address those at the end of the webinar. You can connect to the webinar by phone line. If you happen to have any audio problems, I'd recommend you try dialing back in. That's a rare occasion, but it does happen on occasion, and that's usually the fix for it. Please do enter those questions during the webinar, and we're recording today's webinar, and we'll be sending out an email with a link to the webinar recording for replay, as well as the link to the slides once the recording is available. And you can always visit the AWS channels on YouTube and slideshare.net for webinar replays and slides, respectively. Okay, so for today's format, today's format is going to consist of 3 parts. A brief overview of the Amazon Web Services. The main reason for the webinar today, a panel discussion of 3 organizations' experiences around DR strategy and incorporating cloud services as part of those strategies. And then we'll end with that Q&A. Now, because the panelists are in different locations today, what we've done is provided them with questions in advance and asked for the summary slides before the webinar so that we're able to capture them for the recording. I'd like to introduce you now to the panelists for today's discussion. First, we have Matthew Gerber, CEO of IT-Lifeline. IT-Lifeline is an AWS solution provider partner that I've had the pleasure of working with, who provide cloud-based, fully managed IT disaster recovery services for mid-sized organizations. We're also joined today by Chris Green, the Vice President and Director of IT Infrastructure Systems of Washington Trust Bank, who are one of the oldest and largest privately owned commercial banks in the Pacific Northwest, with over 50 financial centers in Washington, Idaho, and Oregon. And we're also joined, I'm pleased to say, by David Barbieri, Vice President and CIO of Redline Hotels. And for anybody living on the West Coast, you know there are Redline Hotels all over the western U.S., British Columbia, and Mexico. Okay, so thank you all for participating, by the way, in today's webinar and being willing to share your first-hand experiences with everyone. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start off with a brief overview of the Amazon Web Services. And there are more in-depth overviews of Amazon Web Services available on the YouTube channel. And there's also a deeper dive into architectural patterns and such with disaster recovery. But for those of you that are still coming up to speed with AWS, let me give you that overview. So let's begin with something that's really important from a disaster recovery point of view, something that's important to understand, and that is that the Amazon Web Services provide a global infrastructure. What does that mean? Well, we have installations around the world. And what you see here are a combination of things. One of the things you'll see are yellow boxes, and those yellow boxes spread out around the globe represent our regions. So they're geographically dispersed web services regions that you can select from. Each region is fully equipped to provide compute, networking, storage services, and so forth. And you have total control over which region you select. And when you select a region, very important for you is to understand that when you select a region, your computing and your workloads and your data remain in that region. You have total control over that. What you also see on this map is a series of black circles. those black circles represent our content distribution and DNS edge locations around the world. So right now, as you can see here, we've got 8 regions in total, 4 in the U.S. and 4 around in the rest of the world, including our newest region in South America, 1 in Ireland, and a couple in Asia Pacific in Singapore and Tokyo. So again, for reasons of regulatory requirements or personal preference or performance considerations around latency and so forth, for any of those reasons, you can select the region that you host your applications in. Now, within each region, there are multiple availability zones, or AZs for short. And this is really valuable from a disaster recovery point of view as well, because each AZ is essentially an isolated, separate data center with the capability to operate in an isolated manner. And what that allows you to do is distribute your workloads for high availability very easily across multiple AZs. And each AZ availability zone is designed to, again, be isolated with its own power grid and on separate floodplain and complete infrastructure, so that if anything were to affect one availability zone, the others would not be affected. So that's great from both a high availability architectural point of view, as well as the ability to, again, control where your disaster recovery assets are located, where you're failing over to, and so forth. Another very valuable and important relevant advantage to this is the ability for these AZs to deliver very durable storage. So our storage is replicated automatically. The data is replicated automatically over multiple AZs so that it is very durable. I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. So again, we've got so far 8 regions, and we've added 4 in the past year. So there's a high level of confidence that we'll be adding additional regions moving forward to further cover the globe. And each of those regions has multiple availability zones. So something else that comes up quite often in discussion of disaster recovery, especially when we're talking about housing your data in our data centers and in the cloud with AWS. And, security can be a presentation in and of itself, and I encourage you, if you have more questions, to visit the website and read the relevant information, including the security white paper. But, in summary, I'd like to point out that there are a number of certifications that have been obtained, and they include SOC 1 Type 2 reporting, so that's formally SAS 70 compliance, ISO 27000 and 27001. We have customers that are implementing PCI compliant solutions, amongst other things. We're also FISBA moderate and have an ITAR compliant facility as well. Very importantly, primarily for our government, our federal government agencies, although that ITAR region is open to all customers as well, if that's appealing to you. And we also have customers that are implementing HIPAA compliant applications. In terms of physical security, we employ industry best standards, and they include a number of things like data centers being nondescript. Unless you really dig, it's really not obvious where the data centers are. We have advanced physical access control and strict access control. Multi-factor authentication. In short, we take physical security extremely seriously, and of course, all access to the facilities also is logged and audited. So that physical security meets the requirements again of some of the world's most demanding customers. And then, out of interest, from a hardware, software, and networking perspective, it's probably worth noting the systematic change management we have, how all changes are monitored and logged very closely. And also, when we do updates, we do phased deployments within AZs, within regions, So we roll out updates in a manner that's very controlled and conservative, also ensures the maximum amount of uptime. Safe storage decommissioning, relevant again to DR if you're backing up, archiving your data, even running computational data in AWS. Worth noting that we safely decommission, we degauss our storage and then shred it so that it is completely destroyed before being recycled. We monitor, there's extensive monitoring and self-audit and self-healing capabilities within the network, and we deploy advanced network protection as well to safeguard the assets as well as the customer data. All right, so AWS has a very large number of services that are offered, web-based services that are offered, and there are some that are particularly relevant to disaster recovery solutions. So I'm just going to mention them briefly, and I'll drill down on a couple of them a little bit. The most important ones from the DR perspective, if you're looking to understand what is being utilized, and when you hear from our customers and what they've implemented, they'll be referring perhaps to some of the implementations they've used. Services such as Amazon Simple Storage Service, Amazon S3 for short. That's our durable blob storage. Amazon Import Export is a service that allows you to import or export data by way of transferring media, physical media. So you can ship us physical media and we'll ship it back to you. Amazon Elastic Compute Cloud, or Amazon EC2, is the compute infrastructure that allows you to select and have on-demand access to compute. I think we have at least 11 instance types, which are different combinations of compute and memory. And then there's a relatively new service, the AWS Storage Gateway, which is a cloud storage gateway which seamlessly and easily allows you to connect your on-premises applications with the AWS cloud and makes it very easy to back up snapshots of your data to the cloud for backup and disaster recovery. And then finally, Amazon Route 53, our DNS routing service, which maps domain names to IP addresses. And that can be, in fact, a very powerful, very valuable service when implementing high availability and disaster recovery architectures. Okay, just a quick couple of notes on the storage types, because that's fundamentally important in understanding AWS. So Amazon Simple Storage Service S3, again, is a highly durable blob storage. It's a blob storage because you are storing objects, and the objects can range from 1 byte to 5 terabytes in size, and you don't update pieces of those data instances. You replace them entirely one at a time. So it's great for backup and archive, and it also provides 11/9 durability. It's designed for 11/9 durability, and what that means is if you were to store, for instance, 10,000 objects, you might expect to lose 1 object every 10 million years. So highly durable, very reliable, just perfect for backup and disaster recovery and archiving. Then there's Amazon Elastic Block Storage, or EBS, and EBS snapshots, and that's persistent data. So those are persistent data volumes that you attach to Amazon EC2 compute instances, and you do that within any AZ. And it's also a great facility for backing up your application data, and we highly encourage that you do that when you're running applications in AWS, and it easily allows you to snapshot your backups and provide a longer term. They're backed up in S3, so you get long-term durability with those backups as well. With S3, we recently released our most recent count on the growth and the number of objects that we have in S3, and we're now up to, as of Q1 of this year, an amazing 905 billion objects in Amazon S3. And again, an object can be anything, and it is everything from single bytes up to 5 terabyte blocks. And what this is it's hard to fathom how much data it is. It's quite a bit, and it's worth noting at 905 billion objects and peak requests of 650,000 requests per second, I think it's easy to understand that a growing number of customers around the world are trusting Amazon S3 with their key data. So we're seeing a significant adoption of the technology. And out of interest, it's worth noting that 906 billion objects are end user objects. So we as AWS actually store more than that as we do automatic duplication of the data in order to provide the resilient data and the highly durable storage. Okay, and just to wrap up on AWS then, we're very, very proud of the fact that we're getting an increasing amount of recognition for not only the adoption. For 451 Group, you see we're the market leader by far in terms of cloud adoption, but also from Gartner and Forrester and others who are acknowledging that our infrastructure as a service platform is best in class, and we're absolutely on the right path strategically. Forrester acknowledging that we've got the best in class, best available Hadoop operating infrastructure, and we're very pleased to see that. We're proud of that. We're very proud of our innovation, and we're working hard to stay focused on the needs of our customers and delivering the services and the security and the reliability that our customers are looking for. And with that, I'd like to segue to three of our customers who have been kind enough to join us today. And I've introduced the panel earlier. And as I mentioned, what we're going to do now with the panel discussion is because we're now co-located here and you're listening in, we'll do more or less a round robin. We have a series of questions that we pose to the panel. I think these are questions that you'll be very interested in, and things that are on your mind quite often as an end customer. So I'm going to begin this. I'll ask the panelists to go off mute. If you're on mute, I'll just remind you to do that. And I'm going to throw out that first question, which was, what were the drivers forcing you to consider cloud? And this is where everybody begins their journey. So how about if we start with you, Matt, on this one?
Thanks, Delio. When you look at what drove us to look at moving to cloud, there are two very different reasons for it. One was around customer needs and requirements that we started to see a couple of years ago, and then the other was around a series of business needs that we had in order to grow our business. On the customer side, we started seeing two very conflicting requirements coming in from customers. The first was something all of us in the technology business see every day, which is, I want to pay you less for the service next year than I'm paying you this year, so that continual drive to decrease price. The other, though, was with all of the cloud technologies hitting the marketplace a few years ago, there was a lot of uncertainty in customer environments, and so they were asking for flexibility that we had never seen before. In the DR business, you typically provision equipment for a customer and sign 3 to 5 year contracts, and our customers are saying, look, I don't know what's happening with my own infrastructure, so I need shorter term contracts, which was very difficult for us as a business to address because we had to buy a lot of equipment to provision service. And one of the ways we found to address that is if we moved our service to the cloud with an on-demand model, we could provide lower costs than we were currently providing the service for, but at the same time have the flexibility to allow much shorter term contracts with customers. So our contracts have moved from 3 years to 1 year at this point. On the business needs side, and this is specific to our business, we saw demand increasing, so we needed to grow, and not only grow regionally here in the Pacific Northwest, but grow nationally. We were starting to see demand from the East Coast and from the South. And in this business, we would have to replicate the data center facilities throughout the country in order to expand like that and get way ahead of ourselves in terms of capital investment before we would see demand against that investment. And so we looked at building the service out on top of AWS, and what that allowed us to do from an expansion standpoint is fundamentally change the business model. We went from one of having to invest in the business, a very capital-intensive business model, to one where our costs are almost 100% variable, which allows us a tremendous amount of flexibility and a total change in how we scale and scope the business going forward.
Great, that's great. Great to hear. Thanks for sharing that. David, can we ask you next what the driving forces were for you?
Yeah, thanks, Stelio. I think there were really two considerations for us. The big driver was the need for an infrastructure refresh. We had recently hit capacity on our primary backup system, and that was the catalyst for the move. We were being forced really to look at a forklift upgrade of that system because of the age, but other projects that we had happening at the same time made it almost impossible for us to scope the capacity of the replacement system. And it really comes down to the fact that our data capacity needs with regard to backups and recovery, it's just not predictable right now. So we've got some data sources growing at a rapid rate, like unstructured file data, but we've got other data sources like email that are perfect candidates for elimination by moving them to the cloud. So we needed flexibility and needed to deploy a backup and recovery system whose capacity was cost-effectively scaling up and down with the company based on our future needs. So it was for us, the scalability of the cloud model was a perfect fit. We coupled that with IT-Lifeline's service contract terms, and it really addressed the issue for us in a way that we couldn't have with a typical CapEx approach. So the flexibility that Matt just mentioned was absolutely key to our decision. There was a second consideration, though, and that's our need to keep our internal IT staff focused on strategic business initiatives. We're incredibly lightly staffed, and we see great value in handing off those so-called keeping the lights on processes. Our IT staff is really, I guess, more effective at adding value to the company when they're more focused on enabling strategy and less consumed with infrastructure management. So we were able to really hit the ball out of the park on that particular consideration as well.
Great, thanks for sharing, David. And that's good to that's great to hear, because I have to say that quite often a lot of our customer conversations actually are more around the value of the flexibility and addressing some of the challenges there are in IT, in modern IT today. And there's an immense amount of value that's garnered through the flexibility of the cloud from an on-demand and pay-as-you-go basis, and then that focus on internal staff being freed up to do more high-value activities also comes through quite a bit. So thanks for sharing. And Chris, can we get you to share what the driving forces were from you?
Oh, absolutely. At WTB, we like to say we've been using cloud for several years. Back in the late 90s, we outsourced our core processing operations and ditched our mainframe. In 2004, I believe, we signed up with IT-Lifeline to outsource our backup and disaster recovery. So in essence, they became a cloud for us from a DR perspective. We've also developed our own private cloud to support those business critical applications that we manage in-house. So anyway, we have been using different forms of cloud technology. But getting back to something more germane to this discussion here, what specifically drove us in AWS was moving from a Tivoli storage manager / Iron Mountain solution to Commvault and AWS. On the back end side, the Commvault solution is much better because we're a highly virtualized environment, and it just has the feature set is much better for us. Of course, AWS represents the archiving piece of that solution, and so that's attractive because I think, as we all know, tape archives have inherent problems with reliability, availability, technological obsolescence, which is not a problem when you move to a cloud-based archiving solution such as this.
That's great. That's really great to hear. Thanks for sharing that, Chris. And you mentioned a number of things that are really interesting, and that concept of eliminating tape and being able to go to cloud-based storage, that's a recurring theme that's coming up increasingly now. So it's really interesting to hear you mention that as well. So thanks for sharing. All right then, the next question is, how did you address compliance issues related to your industry? Great question. Again, compliance comes up quite often, particularly in regulated industries or wherever personal identifiable information is utilized. So, Matt, let's start with you again. How did you address compliance issues? And as a solution provider, this is a huge thing for you.
It is. I chuckled when I got the question, because if the audience is consistent with the prospects that we deal with, this is the single hottest topic we deal with day in and day out today, and it's how do you deal with security, how do you deal with compliance, and keeping in mind we serve the mid-market, we like to remind our prospects and our customers that this infrastructure that we're using with AWS is the same infrastructure that runs Amazon.com, the $50 billion retail business, and AWS has been able to achieve a level of security and compliance, which Stelio, you took the audience through earlier, that we as a mid-market business and most of our customers as a mid-market business could never hope to achieve and never make that level of investment in security and compliance. So that's where we start. We've also, though, recognized that, I'm looking at Chris when I say this, a lot of our customers are in heavily regulated businesses, whether they're in financial services or like David's business, they're a public company and they have SOX requirements. And so we've built a product roadmap that allows our customers to step into the cloud in a very controlled way, in a way that they're comfortable with. So our first offering involves vaulting data in AWS, but pulling that data back to IT-Lifeline if there's ever an event, and recovering in our private cloud, which we control. Customers can come down and touch and feel and see. But later on this year, we'll be opening that up to both vaulting in S3, which is the AWS storage product you talked about, as well as recovering in EBS and EC2. And we think as our customers get more comfortable and regulators get more comfortable, that's the product that our customer base and our prospects are going to move to later this year.
Great. Well, thanks. And you've definitely been on the forefront in terms of evaluating and also helping to educate your end customers in terms of how they can address compliance security issues and really make the most of your services and optimize them with the cloud in the background. So thanks for your leadership with that. Speaking of your customers benefiting from it, David, can we lean on you to share your experiences with addressing compliance? Super important to you as well, being in a highly regulated industry.
Yeah, you bet. It's really two governance frameworks that we need to deal with on a regular basis. The first is SOX, which, because we're a public company, is a consideration in basically everything we do. The tools used by IT-Lifeline meet all our SOX requirements regarding things like backup process audits, testing, encryption, and security and such. It's a fairly straightforward effort to fit their services into our governance framework with regard to SOX. The second framework that we spend a lot of time and effort on is PCI. And for us, it's definitely the most specific and prescriptive framework that we need to accommodate. And we could leverage IT-Lifeline and AWS in a number of ways to meet our backup and recovery needs in a compliant fashion as far as PCI is concerned. But years ago, we recognized tokenization is definitely the path of least resistance to PCI compliance, and we have used that technology to actually eliminate storage of card data in our systems. So our backups are technically out of scope. But I think the really important thing to think about here is it's so clear that PII rules, and PCI included, are going to continue to be a moving target for all of us who need to comply with them. And I'm comfortable through our security evaluation that the efforts being made by IT-Lifeline and AWS will continue to meet those needs going forward.
Excellent. That's great. And thank you for sharing that, because I'm sure a lot of people that are listening in are particularly interested in things like SOX and PCI compliance, and great for you. We all appreciate your being willing to share how you've gone about addressing those, so thank you for that. And now I'll ask Chris, you too are in a highly regulated industry, and there's a lot of trust. Your brand is directly associated with the level of trust that people have and confidence they have with you. So we're all looking forward to hearing how you've addressed your compliance issues.
Yeah, certainly. obviously compliance is huge. I think you'd have to be living under a rock for the last few years not to be, at least at some level, aware of the increased regulatory burden placed on financial institutions now. And I'd hazard to say that financial institutions are probably the most highly regulated business in the country right now. One example, is that we weren't under Sarbanes-Oxley as a privately held company, but we are now under what they call AT-501, which is really Sarbanes-Oxley for privately held companies. So we have a whole set of regulations and controls that we have to attest to and comply with. So anyway, assessing any type of technology solution, compliance is a huge component of it for us. So in this case, we're kind of dipping our toe in the water, so to speak. I think the key point here is this is strictly our archive data, and it's going to be encrypted. And so from that perspective, meeting the compliance is not too difficult. However, I do see compliance as just a major issue on how much financial institutions are going to be able to leverage public cloud, like AWS. If I were to get out my crystal ball right now, I would say that they're going to figure it out eventually, that there will become a certain level of acceptance by the regulators, and I'm really hoping that will happen, because I can see a lot of potential uses for the cloud if we can get past the regulatory obligations.
Yeah, I have to agree with that, and I know you're doing yeoman's work as well to help see that comes about, and I'm sure the whole industry is going to thank you for that as you advance that along with IT-Lifeline. So that's very insightful. Thanks a lot for sharing, and again, from someone who speaks on behalf of a brand that is highly trusted and relies on that trust. It's great insight coming from you as well. All right then, next question, another great one. How did you compare the costs of cloud with on-premises infrastructure? And this is really interesting right now. There's a lot of conversation going on in the blogosphere, and a lot of analysts are digging deep into this. And of course, we're on the forefront of engaging and explaining this. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from you from an end customer perspective, how you compare the cost of on-premises infrastructure for real with the cloud, the cost of operating in the cloud. And another benefit to having you guys share your insights is that this isn't just theoretical. This is based on experience as well. You've had the benefit of that experience. So looking forward to hearing from you. And I'll turn it over to you to begin again, Matt.
I think specifically for disaster recovery, this is where, when we work with customers and prospects, you can see some amazing cost benefits, especially if you do what we talked about earlier, which is look at how the cloud lets you do things differently than the current operating model. When we go through analysis, we look at two different components. We look at the cost of disk, so the cost, as Chris mentioned, to put that data up in the cloud. But then there's the other piece, which is the recovery infrastructure. It's once you do have a disaster, you lose your primary site, or you lose a big SQL box, and you need to recover that in the cloud, what infrastructure needs to be put in place? Now, I will say, having been in business for over 10 years, storing half a petabyte of data, we've gotten pretty efficient at buying and managing disk. And so while there's savings there, and it's good savings, you'd look at it and say it's about 20% over the cost of us to provision disk in the long term. Obviously, we don't get the flexibility with the cloud, so there's savings there. The really amazing benefit, though, in terms of cost comes when you look at the recovery infrastructure, because the way we architect recovery in AWS is we move the data up there, we take copies of systems and move them up there, but we don't light them up, so to speak. We have them in a standby mode, and so we only turn them on when and if there is a demand for it. So effectively, the customer gets what looks like a full-blown recovery infrastructure available and our ability to scale it up, but you don't pay for that when it's sitting there idle. So when you look at the combined savings between the disk savings as well as the recovery infrastructure savings, we've seen savings that typically range from anywhere from 20 to 25% on the low end to 50% on the high end, which is extremely significant.
Yeah, it's very, very encouraging, and thanks for sharing. And I hope that everyone listening to that really kind of internalize what you're saying there, because it is it's profound, it's fundamentally game-changing from a DR perspective when you're talking about eliminating physical infrastructure and what the implications of that are. You know, it's not just the acquisition, it's always also the real estate, the data center real estate, the ongoing cost of operating that infrastructure, which hopefully will never be utilized because hopefully you're not running into a DR scenario in the foreseeable future. So that's great. Thanks very much for sharing that, Matt, and I really appreciate it also because it's based on your actual experience. So that's great to hear. How about we go back to you, David, with your experience on your cost comparisons?
I think I should apologize up front on my answer because it's somewhat redundant. But at the very least, you can hear it again, and I'll reinforce what Matt just said. We looked at this thing two different ways, and the first was just with respect to backups, and we compared the Black Cloud operating costs to our current costs, including things like hardware and software support and depreciation. And our financial models gave us the same answer. Basically, just based on backup needs alone, the Black Cloud solution is about 20% or so less expensive than our current backup infrastructure that we were replacing. And so, no question, a meaningful savings just in that regard. But the real upside, I think, to Matt's point, is the second consideration of the model, and that is that Black Cloud with AWS behind the scenes supplies an on-demand cold site for recovery. So the ability to avoid investing a substantial amount of CapEx in a cold site means the solution's way less expensive than a traditional in-house model.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing, David. And Chris, can you share with us your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. My first bullet point there, I'd mentioned earlier about our private cloud, and we were able to minimize that cost by leveraging existing assets and technology. But I want to focus more back on what we're talking about here. Really, for us, it was a little bit different and actually quite a bit easier to evaluate the cost or cost savings since we were moving from one product offering to another with IT-Lifeline. So really, what it came down to, we looked at the Commvault AWS, and as I said earlier, it's a better fit for us for our highly virtualized environment. I like the idea of having the archives in a cloud instead of on tape. And so basically, we just looked at the contract and looked at the price differential. So we're getting better features, better functionality, and I think it's saving us around $36,000 a year. So that's significant money.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Great insight. Appreciate it. All right. I believe this is the last question we have for you. A great one. This is a bridge that everyone's got to cross eventually, and that's Matt. So we'll start with you again. What were the challenges when presenting the solution to the executive team in finance?
Yeah, I think this will probably be the most unusual answer for the audience. The one that you would expect would be the whole cost debate, and that was sort of a no-brainer. And we talked about cost and flexibility and passing it on to customers. That was about a 30-second discussion. Where we really spent the time was, and some of you will chuckle when I say this, the control issue. As all good IT people like to do, they like to control things. And so there was a lot of discussion about we don't physically touch it, we don't physically maintain it, and we just had to get comfortable with the data being up in a trusted source, and we got past that. Probably the thing we spent most of our time on was the organizational issues, and this goes back to my comment about if you look at the cloud differently than traditional IT infrastructure, it can transform the way you do business. And in transforming the way you do business, in our world means the stuff that we used to hire people to run and maintain and manage, we don't need to do anymore. And so what we need are people that have a very different set of skills. So most of our time was spent around how do we deal with the organizational issues relating to transition to cloud. And I've talked to a lot of our customers who are facing the same thing. They need different people to take advantage of this model.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Let's go back to you, David. We'll stick with the pattern. Seems to be working. Can you share your experiences with us?
Absolutely. The challenges weren't really that substantial for us leading up to this project, and not really related to this project, but just general, I guess, addressing the cloud for our senior execs. We'd already had some fairly detailed cloud discussions. For the most part, those discussions were really focused on understanding cloud computing and how it impacts IT risk, and so they were broad. But our senior execs understood the concept going into this. So when we brought this opportunity to the table, the discussion was fairly easy because we were able to focus on the benefits of the solution rather than being distracted in the conversation around the concept and implications of the cloud in general. And I think really because of that, and importantly, besides this being a cost-effective solution, the implementation of the Black Cloud solution for us actually solved a couple of lingering DR issues that had existed due to limitations in our old infrastructure. And so our senior execs were really enthusiastic when we brought the idea to the table.
Great to hear. Thanks for that. And then to close out, Chris, okay, I've had a sneak peek at your slide, and I think you are in a very enviable position, probably because of your history with the experience with the cloud. But share with us your ideal situation.
Sure, absolutely. I wasn't really sure what to put on this slide because it really wasn't any type of convincing or selling to senior management. And yes, it's an enviable position, but I'll admit it's circumstantial, as you kind of alluded to already. I think first and foremost, our CIO is on the advisory board for Black Cloud IT-Lifeline, so he's been in part of the discussions early on and kind of already understood kind of where things were going from that perspective. Secondly, and as I mentioned earlier, we're just moving from one product suite to another. So really, the focus for me was in just getting an evaluation from our risk management group and our audit committee of just, would there be any compliance issues if we are storing archived data encrypted before it leaves IT-Lifeline in a cloud? And what I got back after they doing their research and everything, they were fine with it. So really there was really no selling again to senior management. Although I'm sure our CFO is happy. He's always happy whenever we can save a buck. So that's a good thing. But I'm sure had we needed to go into a much larger perspective, shall we say, that the issues that Matt and Dave already talked about are going to be things that are going to have to be discussed by anyone. You're going to have to get that senior executive buy-in for sure.
Great, and congratulations on that, and thanks for that background. Much appreciated. Okay, now we're going to wrap up with just quickly the top 3 takeaways from each of our panelists. And I will encourage those listening in on the webinar, attending the webinar, to keep the questions coming. We have room for a few more, so please enter your questions online, and we'll get to those very shortly. So, Matt, what are your top 3 takeaways?
Yeah, I'm looking at the slide, and I should have put 3, 2, 1. So in that order, I think DR does offer a very low-risk way to get into a cloud application for most organizations. Doesn't impact the core group of people, doesn't impact the core skills, doesn't impact production. So it should be one of the first avenues looked at. Second is, as we talked about, it does allow you to take a very different approach to solving a specific problem. And if you think through what you can leverage with flexibility, you'll come up with creative ways to solve a problem that will also save you a ton of money. And I think the single most important thing is the thing that I wanted to stress, which is if you look at it through the right set of optics, whether you have an issue of how do you scale your business, how do you save money, how do you transform your organization, you can do that if you put the right set of optics on cloud resources.
Awesome. Thank you. Over to you, David. What are your top 3 takeaways?
Well, I think the slide says it all, and I honestly wish I could say this about all of my technology vendors who claim to be cloud vendors. The model's more cost-effective. It scales with the business, and we've been able to hand off a critical keeping the lights on type of a function to a very dependable service provider.
Fabulous. Thank you, David. Chris?
Yeah, actually, I see cloud computing, at least in its current form, like what AWS is offering, with a very robust product set, as being kind of the new wave. There's going to be a lot of potential applications, and I think there's going to be growth in that area. Obviously, the biggest thing for financial institutions is going to be compliance. We talked about that quite a bit. But even with that, there is some present application and value, such as what we're doing with archiving.
Great. So you're looking towards the future as well as part of your key learnings onward and forward. Okay, great. Thank you for that. And thanks to all. I'd like to thank all our panelists immensely again for sharing their insights and their experiences. I'm sure it's been of great value to our listeners. And what we're going to do now is take a few minutes to answer some of the questions in the Q&A. And again, I encourage everyone on the webinar at this point, if you have additional questions for our panelists, please do put them into the Q&A. So let's begin with the first one. And I think this is for you, Matt. How do you, and you alluded to this during your talks, but can you maybe elaborate on how do you recover a custom system or VM in AWS for DR? So what's the recovery mechanism?
A custom system is a pretty broad thing, and maybe I can address it sort of with a spectrum. The way we'll typically do recoveries in AWS is and I know this sounds somewhat heretical, but because a lot of people are running in a VMware or Hyper-V environment, we'll do traditional file level backups and move that data into S3 and do traditional bare metal recoveries into a virtual machine or an Amazon machine image. So you're running that VM essentially converted into an AMI, and we do that because we can do a bare metal restore into an AMI. I'll call it the more custom we get, like when you look at a lot of our banking and credit union customers, they'll have a part of their environment that's IBM I series, P series. We obviously can't recover that in AWS because it's not something you can virtualize, and that's one of the reasons why we have a flexible architecture. We can recover the very custom pieces in Black Cloud Private, and the stuff that we can recover physical to virtual or virtual to virtual, we do that in AWS. We also have a direct connect into AWS, which is an extremely valuable facility, which allows us to build a virtual private cloud. So even though you might have a piece of your infrastructure recovered at IT-Lifeline and a big piece of it in AWS, it's all tied together through the VPC technology.
Great. Okay, thanks for that. And the next question, let's see now, Chris already answered this in part, but I think this may be primarily for David and Chris, and Matt, feel free to chime in if you like. The question is, so what are the next steps for cloud after DR? So now that you've got your DR strategy nailed, what do you think the next thing you'll be looking to do with the cloud might be?
David, I'll take this one to start. We've actually got a couple of things that I'm really excited about. I think the next step, at least in terms of leveraging this service, is backup of our laptops and desktops or critical mobile devices, which we'll be leveraging this service to do. But simultaneously to the whole backup and disaster recovery conversation, we've been building out other cloud infrastructure in Amazon to support things like our websites. But the architecture of what we've built out there will accommodate the restoration and the continued migration of other systems into the cloud, even from a production perspective. So I think that for me, probably the biggest surprise in seeing those two projects starting to converge is that while I'm dealing with DR, I'm able to build out a very secure, very robust, very scalable production infrastructure up in the cloud as well that ultimately will accommodate my disaster recovery, and then some of my other production systems. So we've got a handful of things going on out there, and it's surprising, I think, how the two projects can complement each other.
This is Chris. For me, the big issue, again, and going back to compliance, is reconstituting data or having unencrypted data in a public cloud. If we could ever get across those hurdles there, I would like to first of all expand the DR capabilities and be able to, rather than recover systems locally, just stand them up in the cloud and point everybody that way. Beyond that, I see probably next steps for us would be we currently support a development group, so I could see setting up an application development environment, maybe some testing as being next steps for us. And down the road, if things went the right way, certainly running production systems would not be out of the question.
Right. Super. Is there anything you want to add to that, Matt, in terms of futures, or move on to the next question?
We're staying focused on DR. I think the only thing to potentially add is we have engaged with some existing AWS customers that are running in one of the availability zones to talk about actually implementing DR in another availability zone. So this would be region to region DR. So we are working on an offering along those lines that we'll have out later this year.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. Okay, so I'm gonna paraphrase the next question. I think what I'm reading is so there are different ways of approaching this, and it's like, how do I get started? And I think I'm gonna point this one at you, Matt. For someone who would like to who's considering this kind of solution, what's your recommendation for their on-ramp and or how they engage with you?
I guess the place to start obviously is an assessment of what they've got currently, and in our world, we'll typically take a look at what are their requirements for recovery, and so our initial engagement will be, and this is very typical, where if we're looking at a mid-market organization, they may have some of their systems that they can deal with being recovered in a week, some of their systems they can deal with 48, 72 hours. Some of their systems are 24 hours or less, and some need to be 2, 3, 4 hours or even HA. So we'll come in, and as part of our service, we'll assess those systems. If they're not too custom, we typically don't charge for that. That's part of the service. And after doing that assessment, we'll then roll together what the service would cost and give that back to the customer and let them make a decision. I think it's a fairly straightforward process. I think what people get concerned about is they view this as being a much more complex effort, and when you really look at the steps that we have to go through, it is every bit as straightforward as doing this with private clouds or currently available DR technology.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks. So there's a question about expanding on the flexibility, and I know, David, you had spoken to that, and I don't know if Chris, you have anything to add to that, but is there, when it comes to flexibility, how, and this is kind of a tricky question because it involves perhaps kind of surfacing or exposing some of the comparables that you experienced previously. But I mean, what can you say in terms of the improvements in performance, either in ramping up infrastructure or backing up, restoring? What can you share with us maybe more specifically in terms of the flexibility or performance gains that you've experienced?
I guess this is David, I'll take a shot at that first. As far as flexibility goes, maybe on the on-ramping side of things, I think something that surprised me about that process was we were able to maintain our old backup infrastructure while we ramped up the Black Cloud infrastructure, and so we never really had a risk that the new system wouldn't work as effectively as the old, so we were able to run them side by side. That was nice as far as flexibility was concerned. Circling back to my original comment, though, with regard to flexibility, we were hitting our head on the ceiling of our old system, and there wasn't an incremental capacity increase that we could make to that system. So we were talking about big dollars to completely replace the system just because we needed to add a few disks. And that was I guess not a pleasant surprise for me, because we had anticipated that architecture would scale more effectively than it did. And so the fact that we now have back-end storage that can grow with us or shrink with us, but I mean, really, I guess in the case that I'm citing, grow with us very incrementally and very cost effectively. That flexibility, I don't think you can give too much credit to the model for that particular piece. Chris, do you have any?
Well, yeah, for us, and given our specific circumstances, I don't know that flexibility is one of the huge issues for us. It's more reliability and availability. However, I don't want to put words in Matt's mouth, it's probably more, since they're our service provider, the flexibility comes from being able to access data in the cloud from multiple locations. And to me, that's the biggest piece of flexibility.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you for that. And we're at pretty much the top of the hour. And I would like to take this opportunity then to thank our panelists again. Thank you, Matt Gerber of IT-Lifeline, Chris Green of Washington Trust Bank, and David Barbieri of Redline Hotels for sharing with us today and taking the time. Thank you, everyone who've taken time out of your busy schedules to join us. I hope this has been beneficial to you. And once again, the replay will be made available on our YouTube channel. The slides will be made available on slideshare.net. Thank you, and I wish you continued success.